Morning to everyone. We are going to be starting Masechet Sotah today. Masechet Sotah is sponsored by Rav Yitzchak in honor of Dr. Brenda Levy. She helped me fall deep in love with learning. Today's stuff is sponsored by Ricky and Alan Zibit in loving memory of Ricky's mother, Freda Carlin, Fredel Bat Meir Verifka on her 8th yurtzeit. May her neshama have an aliyah. Mom, we love and miss you every day. Today's stuff is sponsored by Dodi Lam and Tina Lam in loving memory of their wonderful aunt Miriam Oslander, Miriam Bat Meir Shmuel V'Perel, who passed away this week. She was intelligent, creative, full of warmth, and beloved by young and old. We will miss her. With that, we will get started with Masechet Sotah. Okay, I don't have a lot of time for an intro because it's a very long daf, which usually at the beginning of Masechet we have a little extra time. But I will, number one, recommend that you listen to Dr. Ayelet Hoffman-Lipson's introduction, which is up on our site. Very recommended. It'll give you the background that you need. I also recommend, since it's almost Shabbat, you can spend time over Shabbat reading up, or whenever you have time, the Psukim in the Torah. We're in chapter 5 of Sefer Bamidbar. There's a whole section of Sotah just before Nazir. Okay, it starts in verse 11, and read through and see what the Torah has to say about it. As we know, we're going to basically start with the Torah, but obviously we're going to have all sorts of ways of understanding this ceremony a little bit differently than the simple reading of the Torah, as generally happens. So with that, we're going to get started. And again, I'm not the biggest fan of introductions because I do think that you're going to learn things as they come up, which is also fine. And sometimes the introductions make more sense after you've already gotten into the text. But the main thing you have to know today to get started is there's a bunch of steps that have to happen in order for a woman to become a Sotah. And when we hear the word Sotah, we think about, you might know how it's a very disgraceful ceremony and they humiliate the woman, and it happens in the temple and it happens in front of people in public. And it sounds very horrifying for the woman. But I want you to keep in mind, and we're going to see it already on the first daf bet, which is that the rabbis really didn't ever want this to happen. And that the way they describe it is so extreme. And not to mention, by the way, the whole element of it being a miraculous type of thing. She drinks the waters. Again, I'm assuming you know some of these details, but she's going to end up drinking this concoction that they make, which we'll talk about exactly what it is. She drinks it, and if she's guilty, she explodes and dies. And if she's not guilty, nothing happens to her, right? Which sounds not exactly the way we're used to things in Judaism. It's a very atypical kind of ceremony. And it's not even clear whether there ever was a Sotah in history that drank the Sotah waters. Okay, as far as I can see, and if someone wants to correct me if I'm wrong, I would love it if you brought me a source of a woman. I mean, I'd be happy if it never happened. But if anyone knows of a source of a Sotah that actually happened, please bring it to my attention. I was not successful in finding an actual Sotah that happened, which means it's probably here, drosh v'kabel sachal. The idea is to learn about it, and not just in the typical words we use, well, there never was, comes up in a few cases. They talk about, they don't actually say it regarding the Sotah, but drosh v'kabel sachar, it teaches us to learn, we'll get rewarded for our learning. It doesn't really mean we'll get rewarded for our learning. The idea is we learn concepts from here, the whole concept of adultery. And they use this extreme example to kind of explain to us how to have a good marriage so that this doesn't happen, okay? So that's a theme we're going to see throughout. With that, I'm going to get started because I really want to get through the daf without going over time. So here comes our beginning of the Mishnah. So the first thing you have to know, by the way, is if you're new to Daf Yomi, so welcome. Every day the daf gets posted. If you want, there's a page to subscribe. You can get links through WhatsApp to the daf, and you can also subscribe to any podcast app and get it there, or subscribe to YouTube. And every time the YouTube goes up, there's different ways you can listen. That's number one. Number two, we have bookmarks for every Masechet. So if you don't have the bookmarks on Seder Nashim, you can still write us an email at info@hadran.org.il and order them. And there's a link to the PDF of the bookmarks in today's daf post. So if you don't have them, you'll find them there. I'm also going to send it out on the WhatsApp. The other two service announcements I want to make. Number one, the Shabbat daf, if you're new. So the Shabbat daf goes up on Friday after Friday's class goes up, and I send the link to that as well. And starting on Monday, specifically for this next week and a half, if you're new, I'm sorry, but there won't be Zoom for the next, from Monday to Thursday after Pesach. All the shiurim for next week will go up on Sunday, sometimes Sunday morning, and then you'll be able to learn ahead of time if you want, especially those who have a 3-day chag. All the shiurim will be up early on Sunday for the week, and then the following Sunday, I'll post from Sunday to Thursday, and then Friday, we're back on Zoom. Okay, now getting back to our Gemara. And by the way, there's WhatsApp groups of Zoom. If you join the Zoom and you want to come daily on the daily Zoom, which is 7:15 a.m. Israel time, people from all around the world in different time zones that come in. If you want to join, there's also a Zoom WhatsApp group. So you should get on that because there we send announcements, and also there's communication between people. There's local community WhatsApp groups also you can join and be connected with women in your community learning. Okay, with that, we will get going. So there's two stages that have to happen in order for the whole process of going to the temple and drinking the Sotah waters to happen. The first is there has to be Kinui. Now, really, the word Kinui is a strange use of word. We'll talk about at the end of today's daf why Kinui. Specifically, Kinui usually comes from jealousy. But what it means here is he warns her. Now, he warns her based on the fact that he's jealous. That seems to be the simple one. Understanding he's jealous of his wife. And because he's jealous, he basically warns her. He says, I see you talking to this guy a lot. Please don't, and then the question is what exactly he says to her. Eventually, we're going to learn it means he says, don't go into a room alone with this man, even though that's not what appears in our Mishnah. Then, after that, they're witnesses. We'll see how many witnesses exactly, but witnesses see that she went into a room alone with a man. If that's the situation, and we don't have witnesses that see that something transpired between them, but just that they were in a room alone with a man with enough, she was in the room alone with this man that he warned her not to be with, enough time that something could have happened, sexual relations could have taken place, then basically he can bring her, based on that information, he can bring her to the court. But the question is, how many witnesses does he need for each stage? So it says here, one who basically is jealous of his wife and warns her. Rabbi Eliezer, it's just like kind of the beginning, okay? He's jealous of his wife and he warns her. Rabbi Eliezer, he warns her, he needs two witnesses to warn her. There have to be two witnesses there when he does the warning. But to get her to drink the waters, meaning the second stage, to say that she was in the room alone with this man, that one witness, or even he can go to the court and say, I saw her go into the room alone with the man, even if there were no other witnesses. It's very fascinating. We're going to get into this today, how he can be believed to basically cause this whole process to go ahead. Rabbi Yoshua he says, what are you talking about? You need two witnesses for both. The Kinui, we're going to call it Kinui and Stira. Kinui is the warning. Stira is that she was alone in a room with a man. These languages all come from the Torah, from the Psukim in the Torah. Those both need two witnesses. Now we're going to see Ketzad Mekanela. By the way, there's one other stage which we're going to get to in the Gemara, which is, let's say there were two witnesses who saw her go into a room alone with a man, and let's say there was a window, and they saw that the couple had sexual relations. Now, if they saw that, then we have definitive evidence. The whole thing of the Sotah is we don't know if she's really guilty or she's not guilty. But if we know that she's guilty and witnesses saw what happened in the room, then there's no need to go through the Sotah process. Okay, we're going to see this later, but I'll already tell you because we're already discussing this process. Then what would happen is he immediately has to divorce his wife, because if she committed adultery, you can't stay married. If there were two witnesses, then she would get the death penalty. And, she would get divorced, she would lose her ketubah money, and that would be the end of their relationship, okay? No Sotah waters, though. So now, that's what we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about how many witnesses are needed for the Kinui, how many are for the Stira. So we have this machloka. Rabbi Eliezer says Kinui 2, Stira, the going into the room alone with a man, just one, or even the man himself can go to the court and say, I saw my wife go into the room after I warned her. As long as there were witnesses in the beginning, that's enough. Rabbi Yehoshua says you need two witnesses both times. Now we get to Ketzad Mekanela. What does he say to her? Omer la bifnei shnayim, and this is the line in the Mishnah that makes no sense. He says in front of two witnesses, Al tidabri im ish ploni, don't speak to this man. Vidi braimo, and then she goes and speaks with him. Now, you would think if the warning was don't speak to him, and then she does. She went against the warning. She should now continue, the Sotah process. But they say no. Now, as soon as she does it, now something else kicks into place. As soon as she's alone with this man in a room, okay, right now we're talking about talking, which is not that. But if she were really alone in the room with the man and there were witnesses to testify about this, or maybe according to Rabbi Eliezer, just the husband saw, then she'd be forbidden to her husband already at that stage, okay? Until such time that she drinks the Sotah waters and it proves she's innocent. If it proves she's innocent, she can go back to her husband, and the Torah even says she's blessed, she has children, etc. But if she's guilty, obviously she's going to die. But already from that moment where she does this stira and she's in this room alone with the man that she was warned not to be in a room alone with, she's forbidden to her husband right now. They can't have relations anymore. But if he warns her, don't speak to someone, and she speaks to him, she's still permitted to her husband because she didn't do anything. She just spoke to him. Speaking is not a problem. Maybe she shouldn't have spoken to him. It's just kind of getting the husband more jealous, but she's actually permitted, number one, to be permitted to her husband, and she's not disqualified from eating truma. A woman who is an adulteress can't eat truma whether she's married to a Kohen or back in her father's house. Let's say, I mean, in this case, she would have to be married to a Kohen. She still can eat truma at this point. But if she went to a room alone with him, she was with him enough time for something to have transpired, okay, then all these things kick in. She can't be with him anymore, and she can't eat truma. So the language that's problematic is, according to this, the Kinui was don't speak to anyone. And that's really not what the Kinui is. The Kinui is don't go in a room alone with this man. So there's something a little problematic about the language of the Mishnah. In tomorrow's daf, you'll see how they resolve that. Last line in the Mishnah, immate, which also we're going to deal with in tomorrow's daf. If he were to die, now at this stage, she was in a room alone. She was warned. She was in a room alone with the man she was warned not to be with. Then he can bring her to the temple and go through the whole process. But what if he dies before that? And what if they had no children? So if he had no children, then she would have to do yibum with his brother. But in this case, we don't allow yibum. We'll get into all that in Daf Gimel. So choletz v'lo mityabemet. But she is required. So she has to do chalitza, which is this. If you learned Yavamot, you know this very well. Not, you can look on the bookmarks, all the details of what chalitza and yibum are. But basically, she's supposed to marry the brother, but she can't marry him. The Torah doesn't allow that. We'll see why. There's no yibum in this case. But she would have to do the tekes of chalitza, which is the undoing of the yibum. If he doesn't want to marry her, then he does chalitza with a shoe, a whole ceremony to basically say we're cutting our ties. And she can't get married until she does that. Okay, there's a whole discussion about this on the next step. Gemara starts off with an interesting question, which most often masechtot don't deal with this, but once in a while you see it, which is, why is this here? We just finished Masechet Nazir. My tannaitic Sotah. Why did the person who organized the Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda, presumably, or maybe before him when it was already somewhat organized before him, why did they connect between Nazir and Sotah? Why is it right after Nazir? They say derived, as Rabbi says, very famous midrash, because it also appears, or a very famous opinion, it also appears in Rashi quoted in the Torah, which is why many of you might know this. Titanya Rabbi Omer. In the Torah, they're also juxtaposed, although with one difference. Nazir is in chapter 6 of Bamidbar, and Sotah is in chapter 5. So it means Sotah comes before Nazir here, Nazir comes before Sotah. So why are they juxtaposed? Somebody who sees a Sotah, an adulteress, will basically swear off of wine, because look at what wine could cause. So there's the connection between Sotah and Nazir, to which the Gemara says, well, according to that logic, and according to the order in the Torah, litnei Sotah v'hadar litnei Nazir, it should be Sotah, then Nazir. So the answer is, I did a tannaitic ktubot, since it started with ktubot. Now they don't explain why it started with ktubot. Since they started with ktubot, v'tana hamadil, and within ktubot, there's a parak about someone who makes a vow not to benefit from his wife. And then if you remember, we had all these things, what he's supposed to do, because he can't stay married to her. Tana nidarim. So because it started with hamadir in ketubot, from there they got to nidarim. But I did tana nidarim, tana nazil, didame nidarim, and the nazirut is a type of neder. So since we started with ketubot, we got from there into neder, into vows. From vows we got to nazir, and then katane sotah k'derived. And since we're in nazir, then we got to sotah. Okay, sounds very logical. On Daf Gimel, there's a Tosfot, which we'll discuss in the Shiur, where he basically suggests, why'd you start with Ketubot, though? You could have started with Gitim, from there to Sotah, from there the reverse order, and it would have been in the order of the Torah, and the order that also makes logical sense. Because if you see a Sotah, you should swear off wine. Sotah should come first in the Nazir. So he raises that as an interesting question. Okay, as if you listen to Dr. Ayala Hoffman-Lipson, you'll also hear her suggest that and this is very well known, which is the order of the Mishnayot is generally based on how many prakim are in each, which is a totally different answer, which doesn't satisfy our need to try to see a logical connection between them. But It's how many prakim are in each one. And the larger number of prakim is the beginning, and then it goes to smaller. And as a general rule, that's what you see in all the masechtot, in all the starim. So that's a totally different reason. Okay, moving on. Now more back to the content. HaMikaneh. Now the first thing, okay, the first part the Gemara did was really an aside about the order. But the first thing the Gemara is going to do here of content is fascinating. The Gemara says HaMikaneh. HaMikaneh means one who warns his wife. Okay, that's the way it starts off. HaMikaneh li'ishto. Does he need to do it in front of one, in front of two? Right? Really, both say in front of two, but whatever. There's debate about the Stira. To which they say, why didn't it say it in a different language? HaMikaneh means derived in l'chatchila lo. HaMikaneh is if someone does this. It doesn't mean someone should do this. We don't recommend a husband do this. Okay? It's not recommended. It's just, if he did it, this is the way, and he ended up in this Sotah process, this is what would have to happen. You would need this amount of witnesses for this stage. You would need this amount of witnesses for that stage. Hasavar tannaitic. They say from the fact that the Mishnah words it this way, the author of our Mishnah held, asur lekanot. Fascinating. It is forbidden to do this. Okay, so for all you who think, what kind of crazy ceremony to humiliate the woman in this way, et cetera, already the first sugya we're seeing is telling you a husband is not allowed to do this. Asul, mamash, he should not do this. If he does, well, the Torah prescribes what he should do. Now, you might say, why is the Torah prescribing a scenario for something that shouldn't be done? Well, the Torah does this all the time. What is Eshet Yafat Torah? A man goes out to war and falls in love with one of the women who he captures. What's he supposed to do? In other words, so again, right, the Torah could say, figure it out and deal with your desires. But the Torah gives a formula for how to deal with it, okay? If this is to happen, this is what you should do. Torah all the time is talking about situations. What if a husband claims his wife didn't have, her virginity, and what if he lied? Right? All the time we're discussing scenarios that someone might do something that we don't approve of. The question is, well, how do we progress from here? So the Tana of our Mishnah views the whole idea of Sotah, right? Fascinating that we start with this, which makes sense. Just like with nazir, we had the exact same thing at the beginning. Maybe nazir is not a good thing. Neder, we had the same thing. Right from the get-go, they're telling you, we don't approve of this ceremony. This isn't something every husband who's jealous of his wife should go warn her, should go, right? This isn't what it's asur, it says. It's forbidden to do this. But if you're going to do it, well, then, you've put yourself in this situation. We've got to figure out a way to get you out of it. And for that, we have the Sotah order. So you already see that they're not very happy about this ceremony. And continuing in this, Amar Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak, if that wasn't strong enough, this line is fascinating. When Rish Lakish would start a shiur with Sotah, this is what Rav Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak tells us, Amar Hachi, he would say the following, Ein mizavgin lo la'adam isha ela lefi ma'asav. Great line. What does it say? When God sets up shidduchim and he matches this person to that, he does it according to their actions. So if you claim your wife is a Sotah and is a sinner, that is a reflection on you. You also are a sinner, right? I wrote this in the summary on the sheet. It takes two to tango, right? This isn't in a void. This doesn't happen without something causing it, something bad in the relationship, something that he's guilty of as well. And this isn't just that the woman is responsible. You as the husband are responsible as well. Okay, so fascinating line. Shenema, where do we get this from? Interesting pasuk in connecting it to Pesach. Oh no, not this one, the next one. Ki lo yanuach shevet harasha al goral tzadikim. Okay, shevet haresha. The resha won't come to the tzadikim. So that means if you're a tzadik, then you won't end up with a wife who's a rasha. Okay, so basically, if your wife is an adulteress, well, you must be to blame as well. Amar Rabbi Bar Hanna, in the same vein, he says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Hashin lizavgan kikriyat yamsuf. It's so difficult to make, for God, to make shidduchim. It's like when God did the splitting of the Red Sea. Okay, connected to Pesach. Basically, right, the splitting of the Red Sea was a huge, miracle against nature, right? What it's saying is to create these zivugim is as difficult as that. Why is it as difficult as that? By the way, it's a famous line, although usually it's in a bit of a different context. But here, what we want to say is because God basically has to match up each person according to their ma'asim. Basically, God has to do a thorough check on every person. Where are you holding on the Rasha Sadiq scale? And match them up accordingly. That's a huge job. So it's very complicated. Now, where do we get it from? This pasuk, Elohim Moshiv, it's from Tehillim, Yechidim Baita. God puts individuals in their house. That basically means, right, matches people up. Motzi asirim b'kosharot. And in the same way, he takes people that were in jail, prisoned, in slavery, b'kosharot. What does kosharot mean? There's all different explanations. I'll go with one of them, which is in the time of year that was the nicest time of year. In other words, he did it in the most pleasant time of year, which was the spring, right? It wasn't too hot, it wasn't too cold. And so they're comparing the taking them out of Egypt to the making matches, okay? Setting up people with each other. To which the Gemara says, wait a minute. Let's go back to this statement of Rish Lakish. People only get matched up according to their actions. But V'hamar Rav Yehuda, didn't Rav Yehuda say in the name of Rav? They're also very famous line. Arba'im yom kodem yitzirat havlad, bat kol yotzet v'omeret, bat ploni leploni, beit ploni leploni, sadeh ploni leploni. There's a heavenly voice that comes down already 40 days before the vlad the fetus is formed, and already says, this child is going to marry to that child, right? We always talk about your bashert. It's always this idea of trying to find the person you're kind of hooked up with to in the beginning, right? Whether this is really actual is not necessarily to be meant that this actually happens, but there's this idea that there's someone who's matched up perfectly for you and it was predetermined. Now, if it was predetermined and we take this literally, well, how could it be predetermined? But if we match people up according to their actions, you haven't done anything at that point. You're not even alive yet. So it can't possibly be. And by the way, not only that, where you're going to live, your house and your field, all that is matched up to you from before. To which they answer a very strange answer, and also not understandable because lots of people have different commentaries about what each of these lines mean, but lo kasha. Habazug lishon, habazug sheni. The simple reading is your first marriage and your second marriage. Your first marriage, it's all planned from in utero. The second marriage, though, that's the one that's more complicated. That obviously sticks Rish Lakish's, very much so, limits the meaning of his statement because it's only for second marriages, not for first marriages. And then what about his husband who claims his wife is a sotah in the first marriage? It wouldn't be true that it's his fault. It's a very difficult answer. And anyway, all the commentaries have other opinions about what it means, zug rishon, zug sheni. We're going to move on. Anyway, we saw some fascinating sources about the whole idea of shidduchim and how they're put together and, how much God is involved. Okay. And the real important line here, again, for our purposes was that don't blame your wife, without, I would say it like this, even in a better way, do some self-introspection before you go and start publicly claiming your wife is with some other man and making a whole big public declaration. Try to look inside yourself first before you make a fool out of yourself, because it looks like you might be just as guilty, right, as she is, or at least partially guilty and responsible for what's going on. Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Mekanel al pishnayim. Okay, this is the difficult part of our sugya. I'll just warn you, this next section, it's a little bit complicated. It's a back and forth. It's a little complicated to follow. I'll try to organize it so you can follow it. Adkan, otherwise our daf is just long. It's not so complicated, but this part is a little more complicated. Adkan lo pligi ela b'kinui ustira, aval b'tum'a edechad meheman. So I mentioned this before we learned the Mishnah so that you'd have an understanding of this. What they're now talking about is Kinui and Stira need witnesses, or maybe they do, maybe they don't. There's this homachlok. But the part that, and by the way, I can't remember if I said this, but we're going to see a third opinion that does the opposite of Rabbi Eliezer. It says that Mekanel al pi achad and Stira al pi shnayim, okay? And even the husband could do the warning by himself. So we have kind of three options of this. But that's all about the Kinui and Stira. But what if she went into the room alone, as I said, and there was a window and people saw into the room and they saw what happened? And there's definite witnesses. So already we learned that you don't go through the Sotah process, right? So now they say the following. Bitum'a edechad mehema. Now, before I told you two witnesses, because we were talking about witnesses and all that. Even if one witness sees what went on in the room, we believe that witness. And she is, now what happens at this point? We can't kill her, right? We can't issue the death penalty because we don't have two witnesses. Death penalty, you definitely need two witnesses. But it's enough to forbid her to her husband. Rashi even says he divorces her without her ketubah money. There's a bit of a debate among the commentaries about the ketubah money, because how could one witness allow him, right? Usually one witness is not enough for monetary issues. So how could it allow him to get out of paying the ketubah money? But that's a debate. But basically, one witness is enough to basically say she cannot drink the Sotah waters anymore because we have enough evidence. Right? Sotah waters are only when we have no idea. We have enough evidence One witness is enough. She's forbidden to her husband, therefore he has to divorce her and maybe not even pay the ketubah money. And basically she's forbidden to her husband. She can't eat truma also. Okay, that all happens. Everyone agrees with even just one witness. So now the big question is going to be, where do we get that? Okay, so first they say, Utzna Nami, and if you don't, I'll give you support for this. There's a later Mishnah in this Masechet which says, if one witness saw her and said, I saw that she actually had relations with him, she wouldn't drink the Sotah waters. So now the Gemara wants to know, how do we know that Eid Echad is believed? Now, the first complicated part of this sugya is the pasuk. The pasuk is very complicated. The first pasuk, which I'm not going to read, but pasuk Bamidbar Hey, pasuk Yubet, mentions these words, umala bomal, if she does something wrong. The Torah kind of talks about if she did something wrong, if she didn't, if she was innocent, okay, and it gives kind of what happens in each scenario. So then it says, if she was guilty, and he slept with her, I'm reading verse 13, and then it wasn't known to her husband, but she was alone in the room with the man. Here you see the word Stira here, that we've been mentioning in the Mishnah. And she was impure, meaning she did do something with him. Eid Aimba, she doesn't have a witness to it. V'hilonit pasa. Lonit pasa here means she wasn't raped, meaning she was willing. She was a willing participant. Now, how would you know she was a willing participant if somebody didn't see? So they learn from here that, and because it said ma'ala bomal, which means she was guilty, they basically assume that this is option one, which is she's 100% guilty, or I don't know what percentage, but she's guilty. If she's guilty because somebody saw what actually transpired in the room and not just that they were in a room alone and we have no idea what happened, then we don't go on the track of drinking the Sotah waters. And basically we go on the track that we just described. So now they're going to learn, what does it mean, Eid Ein Ba? There was no witness. First of all, if there was no witness, how could she possibly be guilty? You need witnesses to make her guilty and not drink the Sotah waters. So there's something very unclear. If you're left thinking, I don't understand this, don't worry. It's not so clear. That's the point. So now they're going to say the following. And we're going to have to try to figure out how to understand these words, Eid Ein Ba. So Tanu Rabbanan. So they want to know, how do we know that if one witness comes forward and said, I saw them having relations in that room, they don't go ahead with Sotah process and she immediately gets divorced from her husband? Well, it says, Tanu Rabbanan, in the Braita it says, Ve'eid Ein Ba, Bishnayim HaKatub B'Tabir. It means two people, meaning Eid, even though Eid is singular, means there aren't witnesses, meaning there aren't two witnesses, but there's one witness. Meaning, right? Or, or maybe it means even one. Well, they say the following. Talmud Lomar, lo yakum eid echad b'ish. Pasuk, somewhere else, says you can't have one witness for anything. This is why we know there's a law. You have to have two witnesses for any kind of case. Starting now in Amud Bet. Mimashma shene'amar lo yakum eid b'ish, eini yodea shu echad. Now, there's something weird about that pasuk I just read you. You can't have one witness. Now, the word eid itself means one. It's singular. So you don't need the word echad. It's unnecessary. So, mata maloma echad. So why does it say echad? Ze bana'av, it builds a paradigm. What paradigm? Anytime, the first thing we're going to explain is from this other verse elsewhere, we learn that anytime it says the word eid without echad, even though eid is singular, it means two. Because any unit of testimony is always two people. So eid means two, unless it says eid echad. If it says eid echad, it means one. Okay, so that's part number one you have to understand. So now that we know that eid always means echad, let's go back to our pasuk. So therefore, Amar Rachmana, when the Torah says eid ein ba, and then it says v'hilonit pasa, meaning she wasn't raped, meaning she's guilty, what does it mean? Trei leit ba el echad. There aren't two, there's only one, because eid ein ba, remember, it's the negative. It's there aren't two witnesses, because eid means two. There aren't two witnesses, which means there's only one, and yet what does the pasuk say? V'hilonit pasa, and she wasn't raped. That means we know for sure she went willingly, because he watched through the window. I'm just suggesting there was a window, and she's now forbidden. So what do you see? One witness is enough for the tum'ah. One, right? We have Kinui, the warning. We have Stira, which is the going into the room alone. And then we have Tuma, which is witnesses that saw that she actually slept with him. So Tuma is enough to just have one. That's what we learn from Eid Ein Ba. And we learn it specifically because of that pasuk, where we learned that Eid Echad, only when it says Eid Echad does it mean one, otherwise it means two. So again, there weren't two, which means there was one only, and she was guilty. So there you see it. So now the Gemara, okay, that's a little complicated. It gets a little more complicated now. The Gemara says, wait a minute. Halav hachi. Okay, so again, because of that, elachad, elatama dechtiv lo yakum eid echad beish, right? The reason is because it says this eid echad beish. From there, we got to our pasuk. Now they say, wait, that's the beginning of the question. So let me read it again. Elatama dechtiv lo yakum eid echad beish. It's because of that pasuk. Wait a minute. Halav hachi. Without that, hava amina eid sotah chadhi. If you didn't have that pasuk, what it's basically saying is that's the pasuk that proves it, that eid means two. Wait a minute. Let's try to read our pasuk thinking that Eid means one, which is what they're assuming. We would have thought had we not had the drasha of Eid Echad. So, halav hachi, without that pasuk, hava amina Eid sotah chadhi, you would have thought Eid ein ba means one witness. That makes no sense. I afilu chad leika ela b'may mitzra. How will we read that pasuk? Eid ein ba means there's not even one witness that saw her do something with this man. V'hilonit pasa, and she wasn't raped, meaning she was guilty. How could we possibly say she's guilty if there was absolutely no witness who saw what happened? That makes no sense to read the pasuk that way. So they're basically saying you don't need that drasha of the Eid Echad to prove that Eid always means two, because Eid in this case could not mean one witness. Because if you fill in Eid means one witness here, you would basically say there's not even one witness and she's guilty. Of course, she's not guilty if there's no witness that sees what happened in the room. That's the whole case of a sotah. We don't know what happened in the room. So we're going to take her to the court and take her to the Beit HaMikdash ultimately. So basically, they're trying to say, of course you need that other pasuk because there's no way, you don't need that other pasuk at all because there's no way you could have said Eid Echad. Eid here means Eid Echad. To which they say, no, we're going to prove to you why you need that drasha. Because you could have read this pasuk differently. How could you have read it differently? It's derived. You need the other drasha because you could have thought Eid here means one witness. And how would you have read the pasuk again? What's confusing about this is all theoretical, because again, we don't read the pasuk this way. That's why we have that drasha to say Eid means two. But the question is, what would you have thought without it? So Sakadat Achamina, you would have thought Eid ein ba doesn't mean the way we understood it. There is no witness, and yet she's guilty, right? Which we understood to mean there aren't two witnesses, there's only one, and she's guilty, because even one witness is enough. But now we're going to read it as Eid ein ba ein ne'emam ba. It means specifically, Eid ein ba means one witness is not believed here. You need two. Maybe that's what you would have thought it said. And that's why you need the other drasha to say, no, you don't need two witnesses. Now, the Gemara says, wait a minute. If you want to say that this pasuk is coming to teach you, one witness isn't enough, you need two, well, they could have done that in a much simpler way. Instead of saying the words Eid ein ba, what could they have done? Elamai bai, adi katre, you want to prove that you need two witnesses? Well, lishta kramine, just don't say anything and we'll know you need two witnesses. Why? Because you always need two witnesses for things like this. How do we know? Da'ati davar davar mi mamon. Va'ani adana mi davar kol adiyot shebetorah. In general, you need two witnesses. Now, how will we learn it here? So they quote this pasuk, and we'll see this tomorrow also. They connect this pasuk in Gitin, which talks about in laws of Get. It says, if you find by ervat davar, you find something, she was involved in licentious behavior. There it says davar, which means, davar, something. Also, it says davar by mamon when it talks about witnesses, by monetary issues. So they make a gzera shava, which is true for monetary issues where you need two witnesses. You also need two witnesses for davar for erva. So therefore, ani adana, right? Then we know already two witnesses. So basically, you can't say that Eid ein ba comes to say one witness isn't believed, you need two, because of course you need two. You always need two. We know that already for anything of erva. So they're going to still say, no, maybe you would have thought one would be enough. Why? They're going to give two different, we're going to try one reason, then we're going to reject it, we're going to have another, and then we're going to eventually prove that you really could have thought it meant one witness is not believed. And that's why they needed the other drasha to teach you, no, Eid doesn't mean one, it means two. Okay, so it's true. You'd still need it. Why? Remember raglayim l'davar? Those who've just finished nazir know that there's always connections between the end of one masechet at the beginning of the other. You might have thought sotah is different because we already have proof on the ground. Why do we have proof on the ground? Because we're not at stage 1 here. We're at stage 3. Hare kinela v'nistira. He already warned her. Then there were witnesses that they went into the room alone. And now, l'tamim ba'ed echad, maybe just to say that we know what happened in the room, maybe one witness is enough because it already appears already that they've had relations. So this one witness maybe would be enough here. So maybe that's what the pasuk is teaching us, right? Again, maybe you would have thought the pasuk is saying Eid Echad is not ne'eman, right? Because you might have thought it would be. Therefore, the pasuk is telling you it's not, and that's why we need the other pasuk to tell you no. Eid Echad is actually believed. It's very cyclical because you would have thought, then you would thought the pasuk tells you otherwise, and then you need our pasuk to tell you no. It actually Eid Echad isn't. But then they say no, that doesn't make any sense because umimatzit amar te'ein ne'eman b'sharia. You're saying that what you theoretically would have thought is that one witness is not believed, and therefore she's permitted to her husband at that point. But remember, what did we just say? The whole pasuk is telling you hami dichtiv hilo nitpasa michlad asura. Hilo nitpasa means she wasn't raped, which means she's guilty. So you can't say Eid Ein means one witness isn't believed, and then it says, and she's guilty. That's the opposite. You should say one witness isn't believed, and she's innocent. So they say the following: No, it's true. No, you might have thought what it's saying Eid Ein means one witness isn't enough, and then fill in the blank. But you need two. And if you have two, they also have to prove the hilo nitpasa, that she wasn't raped. And only then are we going to say, okay, at this point, you're forbidden to your husband and no drinking the sotah waters. And that's what you might have read the pasuk thinking that 8 is really one. And that again, until you have two, we're not going to prove nitma'ah. Comes this drasha to tell you that's not the truth. That's why you need the drasha that aid actually always means two. And therefore, Eid Ein means there aren't two witnesses, which means there's only one. And at only one, we can already convict her and say, you're not going to drink the sotah waters. You're already forbidden to your husband. End of story. Okay, that was a very long-winded way to get to why do we need that drasha. Okay, getting back to our main topic, which is this machloket Rabbi Yoshua and Rabbi Eliezer. So now we're going to see the reasons for each one and where they get it from. Rabbi Yoshua, remember, Rabbi Yoshua needed witnesses for both. Rabbi Eliezer said you only need witnesses for the first stage, not for the second stage. My time of Rabbi Yoshua, Amarcha, ba. Now remember, Eid Ein ba means, that's what we just said, ba is for her. There's no witness to witness this, right? There aren't two witnesses, there's just one. If there's one, then she's guilty and she doesn't drink the sotah waters. What does it tell you? So one witness is enough. When is one witness enough? Ba. Ba means to say that she actually slept with him. Ba v'lo b'kinui, ba v'lo b'stira. But only one witness is good at the last stage, not at stage 1 or stage 2. You need two witnesses. So ba is coming to say just here and not anywhere else. This happens a lot, by the way. By Pesach, there's a famous bo drasha. Kol Ariel lo yochal bo, and there's a bunch of bows, and they darshan bo and not this, and bo and not that. For Rabbi Eliezer Omer, now he's only going to have one limitation because he thinks in one case, one witness is enough also in one of the scenarios, right, of the stira. So ba v'lo b'kinui, it just comes to exclude the kinui. The kinui needs two, but the stira, it's enough for one, just like the tumah. Ve'ema ba v'lo b'stira. So they say, why exclude that one and not that one? So stira yitakesh l'tumah, because there's a pasuk that connects between the stira and the tumah. Remember, tumah means she did it. Stira, right? We know she had relations with him. Stira means she was alone in the room with him. So there's a pasuk that connects those two. So therefore, if for tumah one witness is enough, also for stira. There's your pasuk which juxtaposes that. To which they question him and they say, "What are you talking about? Kinui not yitakesh l'tumah. Also, kinui and tumah are connected in a verse." Which then you could say, if tumah is one, then kinui should be one, and you don't say that. So there you see, kina and tumah go together. So ha miet rachmana ba. They say, well, there's this ba which comes to say one of them is different. To which the Gemara obviously asks, well, ma re'ita, why did you choose that one over that one? So the answer, mistabra stira adifa shekeno sarta b'tumah. Stira is more similar to tumah because stira is the final stage which forbids her, like tumah will forbid her. Because again, even if you don't have witnesses what happened in the room already, at that point she can't sleep with her husband, at least temporarily, until we figure out if she's a sotah. To which they say, what are you talking about? Adraba, kinui adif, shekain ikar garamla. Without the warning, there would be no tumah, right? The whole thing has to happen. There would be no stira. The whole thing has to happen because of the original Kinui, right? This is a whole debate. This is like, if you remember, there's a very famous machloket Beit Shammai Beit Hillel about which bracha comes first in Kiddush, the wine or the Shabbat, right? Shabbat causes the wine. On the other hand, the wine causes Kiddush. If you don't have wine, you can't have Kiddush. So there's this singular, which is more important, the chicken or the egg, right? Which came first? It's like that. So without the stira, without the stira, we're nowhere because she didn't do anything. On the other hand, without the kinui, you can't get to stira. So they're all important. So they say, well, ilav stira kino miika. We're still circling around here. Without stira, well, this, the kinoi doesn't do anything. Ilav kinoi stira mayahane. But again, without the kinoi, the stira won't get you to the Beit HaMikdash for the Sotah ceremony. To which they finally answer, afilu hachi. As again, we want to prove why stira is like tumah. If tumah is with one, stira is also with one. That was Rabbi Eliezer. So they say, afilu hachi stira adifa de'itchalta de tumah. The stira is what enables them to actually have relations, being alone in this room. And that's why stira is definitely more similar to tumah. And they end with that. Now they want to point out, just to confuse things more, there's a third approach. Manitin de loki haitan. Our Mishnah doesn't follow this tannaitic opinion. Did Tanya? Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda omer mishum Rabbi Eliezer. Hamikaneli ishto mikanel pi echad or pi atzmo. Dafka the kinoi, the first stage only needs one witness. Umashkel al pi shnayim. But the second stage of the stira needs two. So we have all the options now. Either both need two. We don't have all the options because it could be both need one, but nobody says that. Either the kinoi needs only one, or even the husband by himself, or the stira. So Yeshivu Chachamim, the rabbi said to him, L'divrei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda, ein l'davar sof. This will cause, again, we're back to square one. This will cause husbands to be creating situations where they forbid their wives and themselves all the time. Because if they don't need witnesses to warn her, they could just lie and say, I warned her. And who will know, right? It's his word against hers. So this will be a terrible situation. We'll get back to that in 1 minute. So first they want to know, my time of Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda. What's the reason? Because that was a quote from the Bright, and now we're going to deal with the parts of the Bright. What's the reason for Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda? Amar kra ba ba v'lo b'stira. We're obviously going to do the exact opposite of what Rabbi Eliezer did. We're going to say ba comes to exclude the stira. So now, right, the stira, stira is the one that needs two, but not the kinoi. So again, ema ba v'lo b'kinoi. Why don't we say ba comes to exclude kinoi and not stira? Kinoi yitakesh l'tuma. Now we're using, it's the mirror image of the sugya with Rabbi Eliezer. Say, oh, well, kinoi is right next to tumah in the pasuk. Now we already know what's coming next. So we're going to say, what do you mean? Stira and tumah also are connected. So why don't you learn stira is only one? Stira nami yitakesh l'tuma dichtiv v'nistara v'hinitma'a. No. I use that pasuk to learn something else. Ahu lekama shiur stira kedei tumah huda. What's the amount of time of stira that they have to be alone in the room? Enough to get them to the extent that they could have had relations. And that's the connection between stira and tumah, which means we're going to not use it for a hekesh to say it teaches you one witness. No, the one witness is more the stira and the kinna together. Now we're going to go back to this fascinating line. Yeshivu chachamim. L'divrei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar sof. Maini, what's the concern? D'zilnin d'lo kanai v'amar kanai. It could be he never warned her. Or what happened? The woman went into a room alone with a man. And then he comes to the court and he says, listen, we have witnesses. She was in the room alone with a man. And by the way, I warned her before him. He could lie and make that up. So now they say, well, hala mishnatenu yesh l'davar sof. Zimnin d'lo istater v'amar istater. If we're worried the husband's going to lie, why aren't we worried according to Rabbi Eliezer that he'll lie? He'll warn her, and then she really won't go into a room alone with the man, but he'll claim she did. Okay, and he'll lie, and he's believed according to Rabbi Eliezer al piatzmo. He can say it on his own testimony. Maybe he's lying there. Amar Rav Yitzchak bar Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, af l'divrei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar sof. Even according to this opinion, ein l'davar sof. In other words, both the Mishnah and Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda will cause problems like this. So then they say, af l'divrei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda v'lo mebayeh l'mishnatenu. Wait, af means even, which makes it sound like we're very worried about Rabbi Eliezer and l'davar sof, and even Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda, but it should be adrabah. It should be the opposite, because in Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda, the whole beginning of it is a lie, which means he could just later, at least in the Mishnah, there was two witnesses for the first stage, so there's less likelihood of the husband lying in that case. So l'mishnatenu ika ikar, there's at least a basis in the beginning of witnesses. Hatam leika ikar, here it's all the more so. More of a concern and l'davar sof, so therefore they modify his wording. If you're going to say, this is what you're going to say. Am Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Yosef, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, l'divrei Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda ve'af l'divrei mishnatenu ein l'davar sof. What it really means is Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda ein l'davar sof, and even Rabbi Eliezer, you could say that people will abuse the system, and therefore, they really didn't like these two opinions. And in fact, we don't hold by them. You need witnesses for both stages. Amar Rav Chanina misura. Lo lema inish leitate bizman hazeh in nowadays, which means after the temple is destroyed and you can no longer do the Sotah ceremony, you should never say the following words to your wife. Lo titzatri b'hadei ploni. Don't go into a room alone with this man. Why? Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe we actually hold like him. In which case, damar kinui al piatzmo. If you just say it between the two of you, and then you really did kinui, and what if she ends up in a room alone with this man and there's witnesses? You'll be forbidden to your wife, right? There's no way to ever know if she really did it or not. And you're going to forbid yourself to your wife for the rest of your life because there'll be no way to determine whether she's guilty or not. So again, they're warning the husband, watch your words. Back to nazir, nadarim, all that. Watch your words. Don't say that. You could get yourself into serious trouble. Okay, last part for today. Amar Rish Lakish. Malashon kinui. Why is it called kinui? Kinui means jealousy. But here it means warning. Why is the warning called kinui? So they say the following. Davar hamatil kin'a ben ala ben achadim. Option number one is it causes jealousy between her and others. Why jealousy between her and others? Alma kasavar, he must hold kinoi al piatzmo. He must hold like the opinion of Rabbi Yosi B'Rabbi Yehuda. The kinoi you could do just your husband and wife. No one will know. Now what happens? Happens if you warn your wife will slowly remove herself from the community and stop talking to men. This, by the way, shows that women spoke to men in those days. Don't think, right? Alter besichaim Aisha, don't talk to women. Women and men were communicating a lot. She's going to now separate herself because she's worried if she starts talking to men, right? She might end up with that man that he's worried about. So she'll just distance herself entirely. She might be worried also he's going to warn her about other men. He's obviously a jealous husband. No one will know that he warned her because it was just between the two of them. They're going to say, what happened that this woman is separating herself, and they're going to it's going to cause friction between them and this woman, wondering what just happened. Why is she not talking to us anymore? It's going to create bad relations in the community. Rav Yemer bar Rav Shlemia Mishmei Abayam, our last point for today. It's going to create jealousy between her husband and him. It's going to create bad vibes here. Alma kasafar, he must hold kinoi al pishnedim, and he's obviously not worried about her separating from the other. This is process of elimination argument. It's not the previous one, because otherwise he would have said it creates tension between her and other people. So therefore it must be kulei alma, yade de kanila. Everybody knows the iu hu de'ate l'me'abad kina bahadeh. But what's the problem? If he starts telling her, don't go with this man, right? She obviously feels this is right. It's like I see someone's writing an abusive relationship, right? He's basically warning her, don't go with this man. It creates a very bad tension in the family and creates, right? This breaks marriages, just the jealousy itself. So that's why it's called kin'a, and that goes back to the very beginning. We'll go full circle. I'm not going to have time to summarize the daf, but it goes full circle to where we started. Ha-mikane, this is not asur l'kanot, and that's exactly the next words of the Gemara. Tomorrow's daf, alma kasavre da asur l'kanot. This second opinion obviously thinks it's forbidden for a husband, and now we're going to see even more why it's forbidden for a husband, because it causes this terrible relationship between the husband and wife, right? Imagine she goes through and drinks the sotah water. She thinks she's going to want to stay married to him, right? That is not a good relationship. So again, I think what we're getting here is a recipe for how to have a good relationship, right? Don't be jealous of your wife. Don't warn her things like that. Don't show her. This is not a healthy recipe for a good relationship. You know, if we go back to this idea of drosh v'kabel sachar, what more important value do we have as Masechet in telling us how to build proper family relations and what not to do to avoid getting into these kind of situations? If we can read the Masechet with that eye, I think it will be a much easier way to read the Masechet. And I think the rabbis were telling us this from the beginning so that we understand what's going on here. Okay, wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom. And again, tomorrow's daf will go up in a little bit. And again, from Monday, this coming Monday, okay, if you're joining the Zoom, so Zoom will be on Sunday. After that, we'll have a break from the Zoom from Monday to Thursday the following week. And we'll start back up again on Friday. And all the shiurim will be put up online. The first set on Sunday morning from Sunday till the end of the week. So those who have a 3-day chag can get through it. And from the following Sunday, I'll post until and including Thursday. So that will also get you through the second days of chag for those who have second day chag. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom.